Hello and welcome to the Philosophy Podcast. I'm Chris Muntz. In this episode, I will take you through a topic that I believe should be central to all of our philosophies as choral educators. Should I be the high priest in my classroom or the shepherd? The high priest is the conduit that the masses must pass through in order to obtain musical knowledge. Put plainly, the student cannot learn the song without your help. Or do you want to be the shepherd who guides the class to the source of the information and then steps back to allow them to drink it in? So I've decided to call this episode Ripping Off the Bandaid. Why you can and should stop playing the notes and stop making tracks for kids, and you should stop it tomorrow. So this episode, I did a little bit of informal research on Facebook and got a lot of feedback from colleagues. And one of the things that I saw, which is about where I thought I would see it, was that in an informal poll on Facebook where about 350 methods of responses, I should say, towards the question of what method do you use to teach your students the song for the very first time, we got to a number of 21% of folks use as their primary model the playing of a starting pitch and then letting the students do the rest of the work, meaning no notes are being played for the students, no notes and rhythm patterns are being modeled for the students. They are simply reading them off the page. And I actually, my hypothesis would have been that it was a lower number than 21%, so I actually was impressed that we were at that level. However, it was also very clear that this was a minority position, that this is a practice within our profession that is not commonplace, where students at the high school level are left to fend for themselves completely when it comes to learning and reading the music. A little bit more from that survey, just you might be interested as we get started for context in this episode, is that the number one response was at 41% that I, the teacher or accompanist, plays while the students read their parts. That is at 41% as the primary method. Then 16% of respondents mostly wrote teaching or vocal model or call and response, and 13% I make or buy rehearsal tracks at home for at-home practice. 9% the choir reads along with the performance track for the first time. So this kind of broke down. People were allowed to choose more than one, but this gave us a chance. About 300 participants total gave about 350 responses. So you can see that a few people might do more than one of those things, but the top two, if the accompanist plays along, and then the singers are a cappella, was an interesting divide. Before we get off and running here, I just want to remind you to head on over for your digital sheet music needs to graphitepublishing.com and check out the music of Jocelyn Hagan, Tim Takash, Joshua Shank, Eric Barnum, several more just stellar musicians and composers that are available on that website, where you can download the quantity that you need, print them, have them within a day. It's a great resource and also a great way of supporting living composers. The composers are able to control their own destiny on that site quite a bit easier than on traditional publishers. So it's a great project, and they put out a great product as well. So head over to graphitepublishing.com. In the same vein, we also have ryanmain.com that is available as to listeners of the show at a discount. So at graphitepublishing.com and ryanmain.com, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout to get a 10% discount on your sheet music. Now, Ryan's website is his own baby. He is the proprietor there and publishes on his own, which is another great tool that the technology is allowing modern composers to be able to publish their own stuff, which is what Ryan does, and a great resource as well. So head on over to both of those websites and download some sheet music and use your promo code and get some of that Choralosopher swag. So I feel pretty strongly about this topic in that some of those techniques that teachers use, I think, are serviceable in some instances, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But I will go ahead and say that I am pretty strongly opposed to one of them also, which is the rehearsal tracks idea. I see this on Facebook groups a lot where directors talk about how much time they have to spend making rehearsal tracks for kids and how that makes the job so much harder. They're spending time after school, they're coming in early before school, and they are making all of these resources available to kids, and probably feeling very much like they are a hero in some sense because they're working so hard for the kids' benefit. So I'm going to challenge you with this episode, and then also with the philosophy as we get started, that that making a rehearsal tracks for kids is not helping them at all. In fact, it's causing them to be forever dependent on rehearsal tracks. And what that will also do is, as they enter the classroom and as they learn to read music, they're never going to really see why it's that important, because they're going to start to learn real quickly that they're not going to need to apply this solfege knowledge that they're learning to actually learning the song. And so the main takeaway from this episode should be that the method and the process that I'm going to talk you through today only works if the literacy learning that you're doing at the beginning of your class is also the same method, the exact same method you are using to have the students access the performance pieces that they're working on. So in other words, if you do a bunch of solfege drills at the beginning of class and you're doing scales and do, re, do, and all the things that choir directors do, that's great. You throw up a sight reading factory exercise and the kids can read it. Great. But then you hand them a piece of music by Randall Stroop along with a rehearsal track. You have created a disconnect in their mind between the literacy work you did at the beginning of class and then how that would actually be applied in the learning of the music. So what I'm going to suggest and challenge us all to do is to do that literacy work at the beginning of class and then keep that literacy work going for the entire class. So framing it in that way, now that we have it's not scientific information, obviously, a Facebook poll, but it gave me some idea of who am I talking to in this episode. So I'm going to kind of go through that. By the way, I don't have the results in front of me, but I did a similar poll on the ACDA Facebook page probably about a year and a half ago. So before there was a Choralosophy podcast, I did a similar poll simply because I was curious to see if the way music literacy is taught in my school district is atypical. And I knew that it was atypical, but I just wanted to see how atypical. And that poll that I did about a year and a half ago, the 21% was way lower. So it was more like 7 or 8% of the people who responded in that poll go through we don't play notes and rhythms for students at all kind of method in their class. So it is a rare thing. So this poll came in a little bit higher, so I thought that was interesting. So I want to start out before we get too much into the weeds here of this episode, and it's how to, because there will be some how to steps for those of you who are compelled by this idea. Is it possible for my students in my situation to be a cappella sight readers all of the time? And I would say that yes, it is to any of you, no matter where you come from. But the first question we have to ask ourselves is, would you, or do you even think that's important? Which I can't make that decision for you, nor is that the purpose of this episode. This episode is a passion of mine because I believe very strongly in the power of music literacy for students. And I will go ahead and make a couple value judgments in that there are lots and lots of ways to skin a cat, as we've talked about on this show before. There is no one right way to do everything. That being said, I will make a few judgments as I see them. And of course, as always, also on this show, you're free to respond choralosophy@gmail.com or on the Choralosophers group. If you disagree with me, let's talk it out. But here's one of the judgments that I will make from the way I see it. If the students hear the music prior to having to sing the music, then they are not sight reading. At some level, they are mimicking, they are responding. So that's one. If the students are singing along with notes being played for them on the keyboard, they are not sight reading. They are also following along, but at quick response. And if you listen very closely to choirs that do this, the notes from the singers do come slightly after the notes on the piano, meaning it's not really sight reading. So a way I would think about that is if you had a young, new English reader in your class, or maybe your biological child that's at home like I do, trying to learn how to read English. We would sit there next to them with the See Spot Run book, or whatever it is, and the child then reads the words slowly, but we are reading them out loud slowly with the child. We might do that as one of the preliminary steps to help them read, but we would not turn around and then say, "Good job, you read the book," because they didn't read the book. They followed along with a guide, right? So the question is, if you could wave a wand at your classroom and fill it with readers, true readers, meaning they are not getting the information played for them prior or during the exercise, would you? If you could wave a wand at your classroom and fill it with readers, would you? Is independent literacy, truly independent literacy, a worthy goal? Do you want that in your classroom? Forget about, for now, whether or not you think it's possible. Do you want that? If there were methods that work in order to achieve this, would you want to know? Would you want to know what they are, even if they are wildly different than what you currently do? What if it took you years to get your program to that place? Would you have the patience? If there were steps that a person could outline for you that would get you to a place where on the first day of school, a group of kids who have had your class in years past could get a starting pitch and sing 6 to 8 part a cappella music for 45 minutes without ever touching the keyboard. Would you want that? Because if the answer is yes, then stick around for this episode and we will talk about some hows. If you don't want that, then this is where I would get to the next bit of maybe some disclaimers. If you don't want that, I would argue that you're not teaching literacy. And we could have a conversation about scenarios and types of music making where literacy is not the goal, and those are completely valid. And we'll talk about some of those scenarios where learning to read music at sight is not the primary purpose of the learning experience at that moment in the classroom. Although I will make the statement, and I hope to defend it, that literacy should be the primary method that we use in our classrooms because of all of the other methods and ways of learning music, auditorily or visually. A music reader can be empowered to leave our purview, leave us as the teacher, and go access a world of music with no one's help. Whereas if the only method is rote or call and response, then they will always need somebody to teach them the song. And I think that our students should experience all types of literacy. So some disclaimers. I know that not everybody starts in the same place. I completely recognize that. So some of you might be thinking, yeah, but with my feeder system, these are some comments I saw on the poll. I don't have a feeder system that's going to teach kids to be able to do that on the first day of school. They have no oral background. What does do, re, mi sound like? They have no idea. So there's no way we can start that on the first day of school. We have other things we have to teach them. And I recognize that. So in my situation, here's how I would explain it. I get kids, and this is a privilege, I get kids who, for the most part, already know the terminology. So that's how I would describe the readiness of my ninth graders. They know the terminology for the most part. And I would say because our school system allows kids to join choir really with no prior prior to high school requisites, other than they can fairly fluently match pitch. So if I go boop and they go boop, then they could make choir. That's oversimplification, but if they can match pitch, then we probably will be able to put them in a beginning level choir. So we do have some of those brand new to choir kids, but for the most part, they've come up through a feeder system and they come preloaded with what does a quarter note look like. It most of the time gets one beat, a half note most of the time gets two beats. They've sung scales and solfege up and down, and they kind of know the hand signs. Like if you were to ask them, show me re, they could show re. But they are not, when they come to me, able yet to simply look at a line of music and sing it with confidence. That is something they come typically not loaded with that information at all. So what they've learned prior is usually background knowledge that will help them with what I'm going to ask them to do at the high school level, which is great. And I know that not everyone even has that. So in other words, you're truly starting at a square one, where reading music off a page is obviously not going to be the first step for you. But reading music should still be the first step. So let's say you are at that stage where you're truly teaching from square one. Have them read your hands. Even if you're teaching them 3 or 4 notes on the first day, and you're going to go do, re, mi, and then the T below the do. And all of the patterns are going to be those 4 notes. I don't care if the kids never sung before in their life. They're going to, with 10 or 15 minutes of drilling those notes in that pattern, and with those hand signs, they will read your hands. And they will start to be able to jump between those different notes. And the process then has started. That part of their brain has awakened, you might say. So that's a disclaimer. I know that not everybody starts in the same place. And so this is not an elitist position where I'm saying that, oh, because my kids can do it, all the kids can do it. Everybody's going to start in a different place, and as a result, will end their school year in a different place. And not everybody's has to look like each other's. The main thing, of course, is that there is a gift being given to the kids, and this is the philosophy part of this episode. I believe that's important for all kids of all backgrounds to be given the gift of literacy, and true literacy where they don't need your help. If we can give them even a little bit of that, then they then have the tools to access music of all types of languages and cultures and backgrounds whenever they want to. And that feeling of power, I think, is something that hooks kids on choir in a way that is underestimated in the profession. I think that a lot of focus gets put on, can we get them to smile and laugh and have fun and sound good in the first week of rehearsal or the first month of rehearsal, and that is the primary goal. And I would say that that's important. You should look for opportunities in your class period for that. But giving them the gift of being able to read the music so that they accomplished it without you is another way to prevent you from having to recruit. Because once those kids feel that power, they get hooked. They really, really do. So that's one. So I also recognize that there are some teachers who have structural barriers in place to keeping kids in choir for multiple years. And the process I'm going to talk through in this episode is dependent upon your ability to keep the kids in choir, because you're going to make progress. They're going to become literate within one school year. But to get to the point where I described, where you've got a group of kids coming back to you for a second, third, or fourth year, so they're in a more advanced class and they can rehearse that 6 to 8 part a cappella piece, polyphonic, no notes being played for them, and just have an a cappella rehearsal on the first day of school. For that to happen, you're going to have the kids coming back, because that is not a 1-year process. In fact, when we started doing this where I teach, that was a 3-year process. It was the beginning of the 3rd year that my kids could do that. Because those were the kids that by the time they got to the advanced group had been doing that since they were 9th graders, and they were used to coming into the school day or the choir class and starting every single day with a cappella sight reading. And then by the time they get to the advanced group, that's just what you do. And they don't have any frame of reference for what it feels like to have notes played for them first, so they don't have that hesitation of waiting for the information before they sing. They just dive right in. So I understand that that is not possible in every situation. I would still argue, though, that it's that getting the students as far as they can towards that goal before they leave you and go off into the world or to their next music class is still a valuable thing. I also recognize that there are some types of music making experiences, and I hinted at this before. This is another disclaimer. There are some types of experiences in music where literacy is not important. And so this episode is not meant to demote those other ways of learning music in importance. For example, improvisation is very important. All students in music classes should experience improvisation. Obviously, if the music is not written down prior because it's being improvised, then literacy is not an important skill there, with the exception, of course, the obvious would be some jazz theory type things where if a student is improvising in a jazz style, they would still need to be able to read the chord chart or whatever it is. But I just mean simple exercises in a choir class where students are being allowed to create their own patterns, create their own harmonizations. Those types of things are very important. So this is not meant to be a 100% of the time they should be reading only claim. That's not what I'm saying at all. And also that if kids are learning a gospel piece, for example, and learning it by rote, which is the authentic performance practice, if you will, of that kind of music, kids should experience that. So they should experience improvisation over the course of their curriculum. They should experience rote learning as part of their the curriculum, as part of their toolbox, so to speak, of ways of learning and listening to music. My simple thesis, though, is that those should be relatively peripheral because they require a teacher or to be present for them to be things to be facilitated. Once they know how to improvise, of course, they can take that one out into the world as well. But the call and response one does keep them dependent on someone providing the information. And so my purpose for this episode is to maybe make the case that the literacy should be the primary method so that the kids can leave us and go off and do it on their own. So my claim is that literacy opens the door to empowering students to learn without us. So that should be the central part of the curriculum. And I also believe strongly that this can be done in any classroom. There are some things, though, teachers, coming at you now, that you will have to be able to do. Some skills that you will need to possess, or this will not work. So let's talk through some of those things. I do still believe anyone can do it, but some of you, if these are skills you don't currently possess, will have to start working on developing them. And if we expect our students to be growth mindset oriented, meaning I do not currently possess a skill, that does not mean future me cannot have that skill. That's a growth mindset. I will be able to develop this skill. So here are things that I think teachers must be able to do. They must be able to model the desired aesthetic, going all the way from the tone that they want the students to produce, a method of tone. Of course, no two people sound the same. Intonation, posture, etc. If you're not modeling those things, in my experience, students will do whatever you're doing minus 50%. So if you want them to sing do with a vowel present, and then you can model it in an exaggerated way like I just did, and they will sing do where their lips are partially moving. They're going to do whatever you do and then half until you bring them all the way. So if your modeling is also subpar, then they will take whatever you do and do half. So be careful with casual modeling. That would be my first piece of advice. Develop the habit of modeling the way you want them to sing. And that goes all the way, like I said, from the body alignment to the resonance that you want them to try to create at some point when they're getting better and better. So they have an oral model. Teachers will also have to develop their own audiation skills in order to not need the keyboard themselves. With teachers that I talk to about this concept, that is usually the first worry, is that I have never led a rehearsal without notes being played. I don't know that I could. And I said this was actually part of a conversation that you might have heard back in episode 4 with Bradley Ellingbo on this show, where we talked about the conductor being able to develop their own audiation skill to where they can hear the music without it being played and hear it accurately. That is an important skill, and I'll just tell you, take a little side to tell you about my own experience with this. I do not have perfect pitch. I was not born with the ability to look at a score and hear most of the parts happening all at once. That is not a natural ability to me. I've learned it. I've learned how to do it over years of mostly of teaching students without a keyboard. So in the conversation with Brad back in episode 4, one of the claims that I made there was that in the same way that earlier in this episode I said that if a student is singing along with piano being played, they are not really reading. In the same way that if a conductor is listening to the choir singing along with the keyboard on an a cappella piece, for example, they are not actually hearing the score in their head when they give feedback that there's a wrong note or a wrong rhythm. What they're actually doing is they're hearing the discrepancy between the keyboard and the singer, and then stopping and saying, okay, let's fix the mistake, which works in a roundabout way, but it is a crutch in the same way for the conductor as it is for the singer. To not do, am I hearing that it's a G to an E flat in my head, or am I hearing that am I seeing a G to an E flat on a keyboard, hearing two versions of those pitches and hearing that one of them disagrees with the other? Because I would say that a lot of people can hear if a singer is singing one note and the piano is playing a different note, and they will hear that as dissonance, or they will hear that as a discrepancy, and then they will hear that a mistake has been committed. However, if no one is playing the correct note, can the conductor still hear whether or not it's correct? That's what I meant in episode 4 when I was talking about developing that skill for audiation. And guys, I was raised the same way most of you were in choir, where the notes were always being played. Our poor accompanist in high school, I remember this still so vividly, that she frequently would have bloody fingers, literally bloody fingers, from playing so loudly and forcefully all of our pitches all of the time as we were sight reading, and that was her full-time job, was to play those pitches for us so we could learn the songs. Even while attempting to sight read them with solfege or whatever it was, we were getting that auditory feedback the whole time, which is, at the time, was probably best practice. The profession hadn't moved to this next level yet. I knew of almost no one that's my age, 40, that learned to read music a cappella in a public school, or in any kind of high school setting. So I was raised that way too. And my first years teaching were also with an accompanist sitting at the keyboard. So I went through probably 5 or 6 years of teaching in the way I knew, which was the way many of us, as that poll result showed, many of us do teach, with the keyboard being a huge part of the rehearsal. So it wasn't until 5 or 6 years in when actually having an experience of having to lead a choir where there was no accompanist available for the first time in my life, and I don't have the keyboard skills to play all the notes. So for the first time in my career, I had to lead a cappella rehearsals and start to figure out how to do that. And by the end of that school year, that was the best choir I'd ever stood in front of. Because their ears were developing at a much faster rate because of the lack of the information coming from outside of their brain. It's the best way I would say that. So the teacher has to develop that skill too, and that will happen gradually with the students, believe it or not. The teacher also has to be able to learn to anticipate when students might make a mistake. So you're looking at the exercise ahead of the kids in order to give feedback quickly and accurately, because when the mistake happens, the feedback needs to come really quickly while the wrong note is still in their head. So let's see if I can demonstrate that. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, you're going to have an advantage in this episode. If you're not, I encourage you to go back and scroll through the YouTube version of this episode, because you're going to see some more visual aids on that for this episode. Let's see if I can demonstrate this. So one of the things I try really hard not to do is to resist the temptation to sing the correct version of what they were supposed to sing. So if the student, for example, is asked to sing from the sheet music, do, re, mi, do, and let's say that's the correct answer, right? But instead, the group sings do, re, mi, do. Then my response very quickly will be, what note is this? They will have just called it do. And so a lot of times the students will come back and say, do. And then while it's still fresh in their mind, I'll say, sing the do from the beginning. And then they'll go, do. And then I've got them, because then I can see in their eyes that they have just realized their mistake. And so then I'll go back to my original question, what note is this? And they'll finally sing, re. And then I'll stop them and I'll say, okay, so what was your mistake? We sang, then they'll say, by that point they've got it. We sang re instead of do, but called it do. And then I go back and make them sing it correctly. So I'm responding. So for example, the temptation to avoid is do, re, mi, do. And teacher goes, do. Right? If once you do that, then it turns the part of their brain off that is trying to work out internally what the note should sound like before they sing it. And that's really the critical skill that we're developing when we're teaching literacy. So we resist that temptation, frequently asking, like maybe another way I would do it would be just to sing do. What note is that? And they'll finally say re. And then what I might say in that example that I gave before was, on which beats should you have heard that pitch? Well, beat 2 would have been the only answer. How many times did you hear that pitch? Well, I heard it twice, so something's wrong, right? So making them go through that process, and those are teacher skills. Those are teacher skills to put the onus on the students as much as possible. Okay, so let's recap some of the principles and some of the steps. You can see here, again, if you're on the YouTube channel, part of the PowerPoint that I've made to go along with this show. If you're not watching on the YouTube channel, I will make the entire PowerPoint available on the Patreon page for subscribers over there so that you can see it. So patreon.com/choralosophy if you'd like to see the whole resource. Or some of the resources, again, are embedded in the YouTube video, so I encourage you to check those out. So let's recap. I've hinted at some of these things before, but the first step is rip off the Band-Aid. Do this tomorrow. Do this in your classes. Get them singing something they've never heard before, a cappella, with only a tonic as a reference. And again, we've already kind of gone over if your situations could all be so different that could look like learning the major scale on the first day. But doing it by reading it off your hands is really, really important. Step 2, choose the level of music where your students can be successful. Now, this is really important. You don't want your first sight reading experience to be a failure and that everybody knows it's a failure, including your students. So make it simple enough that they can access it, and this is where framing it for your students as a success is so important, because they need to know that you acknowledge that this is not as exciting as some of the songs we sing at a concert. This is a process that you're going to start so that you can start reading the songs that you do at the concert. This is a long process, and just starting with square one. And so it starts with something that you think they can nail on the first try. Include silent singing or audiation into the reading time. This is important also. So as part of your reading, you're giving them the opportunity to first have audiation defined for them as hearing pitches and notes being played in your head. Give them an opportunity to stop and think during the sight reading exercise of what the next note will sound like. That could be a very simple showing a hand sign and then asking them to sing the next hand sign before having heard it, right? Or it could be play some notes on the keyboard and ask them to sign back what they heard. So you're developing the ability to recognize and translate into their heads to that solfege. Number 4, hold firm to the expectation that they can remember and hear pitches in their head. So don't play the tonic a second time. You will be tempted, if this is new for you, is to go to the keyboard and keep reinforcing it for yourself and for the students. But I've never encountered a classroom where somebody in the room didn't remember where the tonic was, so wasn't able to recreate do. Let them know right away that the answer is going to come from somewhere in the class. Even if you get lost track of as the teacher, sometimes might lose where do is. That's okay. Ask the kids. I've talked to many inexperienced teachers at a cappella rehearsals that have talked about this. Like, well, what if I forget where the tonic is, or what if I can't hear it anymore? And I'll always just say, ask the kids, and don't be ashamed of that. Like, somebody in the room is going to remember it. So the trick is, of course, if you feel like you don't want to be embarrassed in front of the kids, just say, who remembers where do is? Make sure it's their responsibility, even if on the inside you're like, oh crap, I can't remember. That will happen from time to time, but your ability to redraw on your pitch memory will just get so much stronger as you do this every day with the kids. Okay, some principles to adhere to for this to work every day. It's got to be done every day. It's got to be done every single day, and I don't care if you think you don't have time. You don't have time not to do this. This is something that will save you time in the long run, I promise. Sight reading can never be only about the what. Hold them to the how as well. What I mean by that is, the way I define it, is the what of sight reading is the note correct, is the rhythm correct, the end. Try to avoid that kind of sight reading practice, even for beginners. There's always something musical that they could be doing during that time, whether it is adding in a dynamic to the pattern once they've gotten it, adding in some kind of tone quality requirement, as your lingo in your classroom will be different than mine, so you give them some kind of lingo that they understand as a way to affect the tone quality, ask them to sing with that tone quality, so that they're never just being told good job because they unimaginatively and non-beautifully sang a correct notes and rhythms pattern off of a board or off of a piece of paper. Hold them to the how. So one example of how I do that is I require that the students use a balanced onset on every single attempt. And this is one that gets missed by a lot of people, I think. So a balanced vocal onset, I call it being connected to the breath. That's my lingo with the kids at school. But what I'm really talking about is that it's a balanced onset where air is not escaping before the noise starts. So you hear this a lot, especially in young girls, but also young boys if they're deciding not to be very brave, and you hear ha. And so in that case, what I ask them is I start training them right away. I'll stop them because that was an unacceptable onset, and I'll make them do it again, and I'll ask them, what is the first noise you hear? And then they start to tune their ears to, well, the first noise I heard was actually and so then we'll talk about the biology and the physiology of that. Well, what happened was air started flowing through your vocal folds. It created a hole between them because the air pushed them apart. And then you tried to fight upstream and get your folds to touch and sing later. And you can't do it that way. You've got to get the air to start at the same time your brain tells your body to start the pitch. It's a timing. It's a coordinated onset. And so I make them do that from the very, very beginning of the year. And what I've discovered over the years is that it does a lot of things for their vocal technique because it builds those habits in, but it also does wonders for their ability to sing the notes and rhythms accurately, which that might be counterintuitive. Like, how could there be a connection between that and the other? Well, this happens all the time. So let's say we're in the key of F and I've got freshman girls, sopranos and altos that are typically, as you know, breathy from about a G to a C or a D oftentimes when they're first starting out. And I've got one group singing do and the other group is supposed to sing so, which would be a C, right? So the group trying to sing the C frequently will actually sing an A and call it so, even though that's me. And so what I'll do is, if it's a breathy, air escaping tone, is I won't even address with them that they sang the wrong note. I will address with them how they were singing. I'll ask them, what did that sound like? They'll say, oh, it was breathy. Do you know how to fix that? Yes, I know how to fix that. So let's fix that. Now sing so. And by coordinating their onset in almost every case, the C comes out next and not the A. And I didn't even address the wrong note. Well, that happens because they are now singing with enough resonance to where they can control the pitch. And so they're, in the first instance, when they sang an A, their brain believed their body and took them to a place that was comfortable with their current method of phonation. They knew what the right note was. They just second guessed it because it didn't feel comfortable because they didn't have the ability with that breathy onset to reach the C, so they automatically went to an A. And they fixed the note then while they're also fixing their how to sing. A couple other principles here. Don't let do drift. Don't let the tonic drift. So once they are singing with a balanced onset, their intonation as an ensemble will also become a lot more solid because they're under control of the instrument, and as I just explained, they're going to be more accurate. So as a choir, they will start to drift away from the tonic. They'll go flat. It's another thing I hear about on Facebook groups all the time, and the question is usually related to, how do I get my choir to not go flat? And I don't usually answer that question on Facebook groups because the answer has taken me already 40 minutes to explain. My kids rarely go flat. Doesn't mean they sing everything perfectly and everything beautifully, but we usually end in the same key that we start in. I would say probably 93% of the time we sing anything, we're staying in the same key because of all these things. And it's too hard to explain that on a Facebook group. So you get all kinds of other answers that I think are quick fixes and band-aids. But ultimately, if you're teaching them to sing with a balanced onset, hear the pitch in their head, always remember where do is, then it is just harder and harder for a choir to drift out of tune when they have all those skills. So don't hold them to it, or do hold them to it. Don't let do change. If it starts to drift, tell them right away. Can you remember where the do is that we started on? Somebody's going to have it, and you got to go back and do it again. Never demonstrate the notes and rhythms. It's going to be tempting. Make them work it out. Ask them where the mistakes were. Use count singing if you have to. Whatever it is, whatever methods or tools you've taught them, make them access those tools to solve their own problems. I know that seems like oftentimes it's faster to just demonstrate it, and it probably is in the short term. But this is not a quick fix. This is a long-term solution and gift of literacy, as I've said. Allow them to assess their own right and wrong as much as you can. It's the same principle. Telling them that they sang a half note instead of a quarter note in measure 2 is less valuable than asking them, what was your mistake in measure 2? And letting them respond with, oh, we sang 2 beats instead of 1 on that note, so that was a half note. Let them diagnose, because if they do their own diagnosis, 2 things happen. They will fix it faster, and they won't make you the bad guy, which is really important. Then finally, when you do have to give feedback, it has to be done quickly while the mistake is fresh in their memory. So I feel like I'm scratching the surface here of a huge topic that it has a lot of intricacy and a lot of detail and probably a lot of questions. So as always, just be reminded that you can be in touch with me and be in touch with colleagues that are trying a lot of these things in a variety of ways. Feel free to shoot questions to choralosophy@gmail.com, as always, or join the Facebook group, Choralosophers, and have some of these conversations on there. I strongly encourage you to do that. But the big thing is strongly encouraging you to try some of these ideas before you knock them, right? If you think your kids can't do this stuff, I think you're wrong. So go try it, because I think they can. I think you guys can do this. And I'm going to move next into some resources that I use in class, in addition to Sight Reading Factory, of course, which is one of the sponsors of this show, but that's not why I'm doing this episode. I encourage you to use your Choralosophy promo code to get your Sight Reading Factory membership. That helps me out a lot, but I am affiliated with Sight Reading Factory because I use it every day, and I have used it every day now for 7 or 8 years, probably, way before I got a podcast. So I believe in it, and I believe in some of the tools they've built in there because they work. They work for the way kids read, the way kids see, the technology, all of that. So head over to Sight Reading Factory and check that out. But that's not my only resource. So in the next little bit of the show, I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I use every day. So the Patty DeWitt Music Literacy for Singers packet is a great place to start, in my opinion, for anyone who is at any level of preparation that your students are. I think Patty's packet that you can get, and I've included a link in the PowerPoint, you can also see there that number one, level one, is two parts, and this comes in soprano alto voice and also comes in tenor bass voice. The first exercise, which I would recommend to be your first attempt at this, if you've never done it before, is to go to that number one, level one, and you'll see that it starts on the tonic. Everything is stepwise. It's 4 measures, and only 5 notes are used. So you have do, you have the T below, and the top line ascends only to the fa and back down. So a total range for the entire choir there of 5 notes, which can be led up to, can be prepared by a 5-note exercise with them just reading your hands, right? So that's a place to start. You've played only the tonic, the choir sings the tonic. They're going to be able to do this within the first 5 to 7 minutes of your very first attempt at a cappella sight reading if you've never done it before. I really believe that. Now, of course, there are going to be kids who are still not yet at the pitch matching stage. And of course, all of this demonstration kind of assumes that not 100% of the students in a class will be able to get it, but it is a group activity, and you can move on and add concepts even when some students are still trying to get to that true square one, which is that if I go boop, can you go boop? Or is there a challenge there? Of course, I know that that's not going to be every student, but I believe that no matter what your feeder situation is, no matter what your students' prior knowledge coming from the feeder is, if you look at this exercise here, you're going to be able to do that. And believe it or not, that might seem so disconnected from what you want your rehearsals to be like, and maybe you're doing much more challenging music than a 4-measure stepwise exercise. So you might feel like you're taking a step backward. I would, in my experience, be shocked, as if you're watching on the YouTube channel, I'm scrolling through this packet here. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, of course, it's proprietary. You can see after just a few days, she's got you moving on to 8-measure exercises. I would be shocked if your choir was not doing highly complex stuff if you start at the beginning and do one of those exercises every single day. They're going to be bored with those pretty quick, at which point you are ready to move on to the more complicated stuff. Guys, it works. So really try this one out, especially if your students are truly beginners. This is where I would start. After 3 or 4 weeks on the Patty DeWitt packet, again, in the scenario where maybe you believe that your students are not ready yet for all the time a cappella sight reading, then I would put you in the category of somebody whose kids are still very new to this. And so what I would suggest is, after maybe 4 weeks with say a beginning level class, so a freshman or maybe 8th grade class that has never done a whole lot of a cappella sight reading, I would stick to that Patty DeWitt packet for about that time, for about 3 to 4 weeks. Because one of the things that her packet does, which is wonderful, is the music is very formulaic, meaning there's lots of repeating patterns. So lots of measure 4 is just like measure 1, those types of things that happen in there. And that's valuable for your young singers to start to recognize when a pattern has come back, because then they don't have to expend as much mental energy to try to recreate it. They can remember it from before rather than reading it anew. Once your kids start to get pretty good at those, though, I would start to shift about 2 to 3 days out of each week. Again, that is assuming you are getting to this 5 days a week, which you should be if you have class 5 days a week. Then head over to Sight Reading Factory and start mixing in some of those exercises. And one of the big reasons why is they are less formulaic. So they are going to challenge the singers in a different way, in that a computer program essentially randomly creates an exercise, and it is not going to have as many repeating patterns. So I'll walk you through how this will work. So I've got favorites here because I use the site a lot, but I'm going to go ahead and build it the way you probably will if it's your first time. I'm going to click on Ensemble. I'm going to click on Choir Multi-Part. And I'm going to start out here at level 1. Let's have a soprano voice and a tenor voice. Doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm going to choose a time signature. I would choose the key of F to start, just like Patty DeWitt does. We're going to see what comes up here at level 1. So you can see already a little bit more complicated. The Sight Reading Factory level 1 is trickier than Patty DeWitt's level 1, number 1. Okay, so this is why if your kids are brand new to sight reading with no help from a keyboard, no prior demonstration of pitches, if that is a new thing, then I would start in the packet and then move to here, move to Sight Reading Factory gradually. My freshmen this year, for an example, were really strong sight readers coming in on the first day comparatively to other years that I've had, meaning they that exercise 1, number 1, was quite a bit too easy for them. They were bored on the first day. I congratulated them on their preparation. That was exciting. We were able to move into Sight Reading Factory right away, but some of those exercises were tricky, which is why I recommend kind of moving back and forth. It gives them a kind of a mix of challenge and success. So here you can see on this exercise that the tonic can be played. You can press the button, and you probably, I don't think I have my system audio recording here, but you're hearing the starting pitches. You can set it up to play only the tonic as well. And then what we typically do is we will allow the students to audiate the exercise first before we attempt to sing it. And so they're taught to try to hear do in their head, hear re in their head, hear mi in their head as an imaginary set of pitches. The way I prove to them all that they can do that, and it's a very intuitive thing when kids are told that they can sing in their head. And I ask them to close their eyes and try to picture in their mind someone singing happy birthday to them. Well, they recognize right away that they can hear, if they decide to, they can hear someone singing happy birthday in their head. And I explain to them that then once you've got the pattern of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do memorized, then you can close your eyes, you can picture in your mind, so to speak, all of those notes happening in order, and they recognize, no matter how new they are, oh yeah, I can do that. Then we walk through an exercise like this, where each group hears the tonic, they sing, we have them sing a scale, up to so, back down to do, then from the do down to the fa below, and back up, and then an arpeggio, where they outline a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. And you could design your own pattern for that, but I recommend that as being part of the routine, because that we tell the kids that that's going to be the answer key. All the answers that they are going to see in this exercise are there. Okay, so you can also refresh these, see different exercises, and again, it randomly will, if you have a membership, it'll spurn out a completely unique exercise every single time, just within the rules that you've set. So this entire process for us at the beginning of class, we do as part of our warm-up, and it's done within the first 5 to 7 minutes of class. And of course, the progression that you will see from day 1 to day 2 to then day 12 is pretty remarkable. You're not going to be able to read all of the songs that you perform on your concerts right away in this way, but it will start to establish those habits. And we will finish out with a little treat of the audio from my students at the high school on the first day of school. This is my advanced group during the school day, sight reading from Sight Reading Factory on the first day. If you're seeing it on the YouTube channel, it's more interesting, so head on over there and check that out if you get a chance. But here's what that sounds like.
This is sight reading exercise number 1 of the school year. I hope you all feel the gravity. E of F, sing do.
Now you can see and hear that they are in their audiation part of the exercise, where they are using their hands and trying to hear their line before they sing it.
Sing Holy first. Ready and sing. Very nice. I would like a one-syllable word related to summer that we will sing on this exercise. Jenna, go. Sun. Sing the exercise on sun. Take out the solfege and continue to use your hands and sing sun. 1, 2, ready, and go. Very nice. High five and name.
Thanks as always for sticking around to the end of the episode. If you got something out of this, and if you episode was a little bit unique also, so I'm hoping you learned something that you could apply in your classroom. And I was thinking in this episode too, the feedback that you provide me with is even more important than normal because, as I said earlier, I feel like this is just scratching the surface. There's probably so much more that needs to be talked about. If you've never done this before and you need help, I want this to be a resource. So if you have ideas for me of what you'd like to hear next on this topic, I could always make a follow-up to this episode. So let me know what questions I left lingering. I tried to be thorough with a process, but without you sitting right in front of me with your questions, it's hard for me to tell what else you need to know. So thanks for listening all the way through, but if you've got more questions, please send questions to choralosophy@gmail.com or ask them on the Facebook group Choralosophers. If you are enjoying the show overall, there are a variety of things that I would love for you to do to help. The easy ones: like and share when you see the posts on Facebook or on Twitter, retweet them, leave a rating in the app and a comment in the app. Those are actually built-in ways to increase the visibility of the show within the apps you use to listen to podcasts. And of course, if you want to support the mission directly, you can go to patreon.com/choralosophy, and for as little as $3 a month, you can be an official choralosopher and get patron-only content on there, including the full PowerPoint from this presentation, this episode today. So you can see that and have that as a resource forever if you go on the Patreon and join for as little as $3 a month. That gets you access to all of that content. And there's a few other swag levels on there you can check out. So the big thing, though, is share and keep listening.